Okay, so the reason that the previous prediction didn't work, which was for Sivan 29, 4 fire signs of 1 Kings 18 and 2 Kings 1, was that Asheraian Pentecosts count BLC rather than solar. I mean, I had them counting both ways. I had a Pentecost on Elul 14, which ends the Great Tribulation this year, which was the 96th BLC Pentecost from the fall of the Watchtower 2005, ER 14. And I was also counting solar Pentecost to Sivan 29, but I mean, I thought perhaps you could do that, but evidently not. I suppose it was a bit of a long shot, that. So we know that the Elul 14, because that is Elul 14 2018 is 7 months of heating up of the fiery furnace of Daniel 3 before the lava flood, which must be 2019 Nisan 14, because that's the day that Adam was sentenced, so that's the day that he should begin to be executed. But that sentence had a stay of execution, but God did say, on this day you will die. So the lava flood must start Nisan 14, and that's when you put people in the fiery furnace, but whilst it's being heated up and nobody goes in it. So that's the period between the end of the Great Tribulation, which is a nuclear war, which fries people, unfortunately. And then you have 7 months when nobody gets Great Tribulated or lava flooded, and then you have the lava flood. So that's the symbolism of the heating up the furnace for 7 months. It also has to do with global warming, which causes the Earth to pop its volcanoes, which causes the lava flood, which is the planet cleansing itself of the irritant of mankind, which has abused it. And the planet is a living system, I suppose. And the scriptures actually do say that the earth will vomit you out if you behave badly. And that's an interesting terminology, because the way that the earth vomits is by spewing lava out. So we know Elul 14 is correct, and that must be the end of the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is a nuclear war, so that will be the last nuclear, thank God, literally, that's the last nuclear bomb that mankind lets off in their infinite stupidity and unrighteousness, thinking that having personal power is more important than killing 1 million people. And that's the 96th BLC Pentecost from the fall of the Watchtower. Therefore you must count them BLC. I thought perhaps you could count them both, but evidently you can't. So Sivan 29 was incorrect for that reason. So now the two Pentecosts that we are going for the two fire signs, are the two Pentecosts after Sivan 29, which are firstly the second 1NC Pentecost, which runs from First Fruits ER 19 after the late Passover ER 14, and that runs to Tammuz 8. And then the third fire sign is the late 1NC Pentecost. The original 1NC Pentecost was Sivan 10, running from First Fruits on Nisan 21, and the late version of that is Tammuz 10. I mean, everybody understands the 1NC Pentecost. Actually they don't, but people have a vague understanding of the 1NC Pentecost, running from First Fruits in Nisan to somewhere between Sivan 5 and Sivan 11, depending on when the first day of the week falls during cakes, in the case of First Fruits, or on the day after cakes. Most churches think it's actually always Sivan 5 or 6. That's wrong. The 1AC Pentecost under Moses, you had to count the Sabbaths, so you didn't know when it would be unless you knew when the Sabbaths were. It depends between Sivan 5 and Sivan 11. And then if you miss that, you can go to the late version of it. So this year it was Sivan 10, so the late version is Tammuz 10. But if you miss the Passover on Nisan 14, you go to the late version of that, ER 14. Then you count a Pentecost from First Fruits on ER 19, the first day of the week after the Sabbath, the interposing Sabbath in cakes. The interposing Sabbath is always in cakes, but the first day of the week can actually be ER 22 if the Sabbath is ER 21. But this year it's ER 19, and then you count a Pentecost to Tammuz 8. So those are the two possible second fulfillments of the 1NC Pentecost. There's actually a fourth version, which is the late second 1NC Pentecost. So that will be for people who go to the ER 14 Passover, having missed the Nisan 14 one. Then they give their first fruits on ER 19. Then they forget to go or can't go to the Tammuz 8 Passover, in which case they can go to the second version of that, a late version of that, which is Ab 8. So this year you have 4 different 1AC Pentecosts: Sivan 10, in order, then the 1NC. Then you've got the second one on Tammuz 8, then the late first one on Tammuz 10, then you have the late second one on Ab 8. But we're predicting fire signs Tammuz 8 and Tammuz 10, which is the second 1AC Pentecost, and the late first 1AC Pentecost. And those are the first divine Pentecosts that fall wholly after the Lord's Witness Exodenic times, which is the go back 7 times of 1 Kings 18 that Elijah says to the attendant, which ended on 2018 Nisan 15. Save then the actual original 1NC Pentecost from Nisan 21 to Sivan 10 falls after the Exodenic times. But that didn't have a fire sign, we believe, because it doesn't satisfy 2 Kings 1, which requires a following chief of 50 for the second fire sign. And Sivan 10 is not a following chief, it's actually part of the original 50 count. Whereas either the second 1NC Pentecost or the late 1NC Pentecost is following, is the chief that follows after the original chief, which is the inclusive chief of the 1NC. The chief just means, head, which can be first or last, depending on how you count it. Although a following chief would be last, wouldn't it? In that interpretation of the word following. But it's not possible for the regular 1NC Pentecost on Sivan 10 to be a following chief, whereas Tammuz 8 and Tammuz 10 can be. And we think that is why there was no fire sign on Sivan 10. Alright, so now we're going for Tammuz 8 and Tammuz 10. Now it could be Tammuz 7 because that's the 7th Sabbath of the second 1NC Pentecost. So it's actually Tammuz 7-8 for the second fire sign, which is June 22 to 24, which is Friday, Saturday, Sunday this weekend. And then the third fire sign is June 25-26, which is Tammuz 10, which is Monday, Tuesday next week. So those are the latest predictions. Now, we think they're correct because we always think they're correct, but also because of the 100 prophets hidden by 50s in the cave. That's the reappointed Laodicean cave. And as I said in the previous talk, that they were reappointed on 2017, Adar 17, after their Laodicean Passover on Adar 14. And that's the end of the 1260 days of them, the two witnesses of Revelation 11, of them being a witness but not a priest, which began 2014 Elul 17, which was the first day of their wilderness penalty after they became a false church. But they're now reappointed to be a true church. And then we thought you count 100 days from that for the 100 prophets in the cave. And that would have taken you from Adar 17, it would take you to Sivan 26. But they're hidden by 50s. So it's 2 lots of 50, so it's actually 2 Pentecosts. So it's the first 2 Pentecosts that occurred during Divine Pentecost, that occurred during Laodicea. Now, there isn't a Laodicean 50 count Pentecost, which would in fact run from Adar 17 to ER 12, 2018, because they don't have a water baptism. So they're not installed as an Isaic priesthood. They're installed as an Abrahamic priesthood, which only takes 7 days. It doesn't take a Pentecost. So there wasn't a Laodicean Pentecost on ER 12. We thought there would be, but that was an Isaic Abrahamic misconception of ours. But there are obviously the first New Covenant 1NC Pentecost, Sivan 10, and then the next Pentecost is Tammuz 8. So those are the 2 50 counts of the 2 lots of 50 in the cave. So they come out of the cave Tammuz 8, so they hide until Tammuz 8. Now we presently have the 2 spies coming to see us of Joshua 2 on Tammuz 5. Quite a few proofs of that. Firstly, we finally understand what time the cocker scarlet cord in the window is. Window lets light in, that's when you become a true church. So they gained a window on Adar 17, 2017 Laodicea did. And you tie a scarlet cord, that is the 3 EC water baptism of Russell, the descended Charles Russell, who's visited Laodicea and baptized Jonah and started off a 3 EC water baptism, restarted it. We know that there are to be 2 water baptisms at the crossing of the Red Sea, because the waters made a wall to the right and to the left. There were 2 walls of waters that the Jews walked across on dry land. The dry land is Laodicea. The wall of water, Paul said, the law of the wall. The wall of a city pictures the law of a church, because a wall keeps people in or determines whether they're thrown out, which is what a law does in a church. And the gate is the baptism, or the disfellowshipping, the excommunication. So there's 2 walls and 2 sets of waters, which is 2 water baptisms, the 3 EC for the 1 NC reserves and the 4 EC for the 2 NCs. And there's 2 laws, a 3 EC law effectively for the Holy Spirit, or the future Holy Spirit, and 4 EC law for 2 NCs and for Zoa. And these 2 sticks of Ephraim and Judah need to unite into one stick. And that's what happens in Tammuz. So the Coccus scarlet thread is a baptism line of the 3 EC, which begins with Jonah, who's personally baptized by Russell. And I can't quite decide. It depends how you define an apostle. Russell is now a part of the Holy Spirit, which is Jesus' wife. Whether he can still be an apostle in those circumstances, I'm not quite sure. I don't know whether he's the half apostle or whether Jonah is. Anyway, Russell baptizes Jonah and Jonah baptizes everybody else. So the thread tied in the window is Jonah, and there's a baptism line from him. And everybody in that line we must preserve alive. We must honour their sainthood as long as they come to the relevant Passover. So now I know when to start counting that scarlet thread from. It's the baptism of Jonah, which was on Sivan 3, when Russell appeared to him, 8 days of John 20. Late in the day, he first appears to Laodicea and not to the 2 spies, on ER 25, which is the first of the Sabbaths of second 1NC weeks from ER 19. The first Sabbath was ER 25. So Russell appears to them then, fulfilling John 20. Then 8 days later he appears to the spies, because Thomas wasn't with, Thomas is one of the spies, Thomas is Jonah. Thomas wasn't with the apostles when Jesus first appeared, so he made a second appearance 8 days later. That's Sivan 3. And that is when Jonah got baptized. And then you count, the sentence count of, we're coming into the land, and how's it, your mother and your father and your brother and your whatever, and your blood will be on our head if you do this, and it won't be on our head if you do that. And you count all that up, and it is either 29 or 31 times, which takes you from Sivan 3 to Tammuz 2 or 4. And then it says, Rahab says, in accordance with your words, plural, Hebrew plural, let it be. So that's another 3 times. So that takes you to Tammuz 5 or 7, and actually it's Tammuz 5. So that's when they come into the land. Another proof is that in Joshua 2:23 there's a sentence count of how long it takes after they leave before they arrive here, and that's either 14 or 20 times depending on how you count it. We now think it's 20 times, and it runs from when they leave the first day of late first watchtower cakes, Sivan 15, to Tammuz 5. And there are other proofs too, which I cannot remember, which are better actually. So Tammuz 5 is when we see the spies, actually another proof is that there's a fire sign on Tammuz 8, and they're going to stop hiding then. And also the hiding must stop at Tammuz 8 because that's the end of the second 50, and they hide here for 3 days. The reason they do that prophetically is that they have to hide for 100 days, and by the time they get here they've only hidden for they've only hidden for 47 of the last 50 days of the second Pentecost, which is the second 1NC Pentecost, which ends on Tammuz 8. So they've got another 3 days of hiding to do, which they do when they get here. Now this is all beautifully described by Daniel 5. Mene, mene, tekel and parsin, for Laodicea. Okay, so Belshazzar's feast is the Laodicean Passover, 2017 Adar 14. Okay, before the lampstand. Lampstand is when they got reappointed as a church, 2017 Adar 17, 3 days after the feast. And before the 1,000, they're drinking wine. That's the 1,000 days of the LW Sabbath, which is I must say, is a rather theoretical Sabbath so far, and will be until we finish building the temple. And it began on Adar 29, 15 days after the Passover. And then the 5 fingers of the hand doing the writing on the wall are the next 5 Passovers: Nisan 14, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz and Ab 14, which are all the Passovers for the Watchtower 1NC reserves, which cup is presided over by the chief of the cupbearers, which is the administration of Laodicea, although the ordinances for that Passover are decided by this church, although implemented initially by Russell and then on Tammuz 14 by us. So the two Mene Mene is the 1 NC Pentecost to Sivan 10, and the second 1 NC Pentecost to Tammuz 8. And then the judgment, Tekel, is Tammuz 10, which is the last day of Passover entry for Watchtower 1 NC reserves. That's the last possible day. If you don't come in on Tammuz 10, you're not a 1 NC reserve from the Watchtower. You can come in on Ab 10 if you're a 1 NC reserve from the world, who used to be in the Watchtower but left or was thrown out of the Watchtower. But the last possible entry day for a Watchtower 1 NC reserve from the congregations, actually not the Bethels, Tammuz 10, so there's the judgment. And then the division occurs on Tammuz 14, which is when we hold a Passover in this church, as well as there being, well, I don't think they don't hold one in the Watchtower on Tammuz 14. Actually, it's a unification of Laodicea with us, but a division of the 1 NCs finally outside of Watchtower control. Took them long enough. So there's Mene Mene, Tekel and Parsin. It's the 1 NC Pentecost, the second 1 NC Pentecost. Tekel is the judgment of the last possible Passover entry day, and Parsin is the Tammuz 14 Passover. I suppose it's also the Ab 14 Passover, which is a further Parsin. That's the sort of chronology of the fast signs, and it's confirmed by the 250s of Laodicea. We think there might also be a 50 count on the contest itself from 2006 ER1, in which case the 88th Pentecost BLC, straight BLC 50 count. The 88th would be 2018 Tammuz 21, and the 89th would be 2018 L11. So those are the fast signs. Right, so what's going on here is the original exodus of God's people. The way God rescues his people from slavery is by a Passover and an Exodus and a Red Sea crossing and a wilderness and all this stuff. And that's what happened in Egypt. And that's how he got Israel out of Egypt. The same thing happened in the first presence, when the first true church became corrupted into the Roman Catholic Church, when they compromised with Rome, understandably. And at that point, Satan took over the church through Rome. And so God had to get his people out because they became slaves to Rome. And the way he did that was a Passover. And that Passover occurred in Iyar, because it was the second fulfillment of getting God's people out of a slavery situation, whereas the Egyptian one happened in Nisan, because it was the first fulfillment in the first month of the year, second fulfillment in the first presence from the Roman Catholics from FDS 1 to 2 was in Iyar, and then the third fulfillment, which is from the Watchtower into Lord's Witnesses, it occurs in Sivan. So what's going on is the whole chronology and pattern that happened in Nisan in Egypt is now happening from Sivan, which was the Watchtower Passover, where there was an execution of Bethelites, 1 NC reserves, and oldest by baptism in the Bethels, which has of course been covered up by the Watchtower, because they cover up anything. They're not interested in the truth, they're interested in power. And they've been very successful in holding on to power and holding on to God's people, but God has permitted it for the purpose of showing his power, which, regrettably, I have to inform Watchtower administrators, is greater than yours. And so he's going to get all of his people out, and you're going to let them go, and they will strip the Watchtower of the gold, which is the 1 NC reserves, and the silver, which is the 2 NC saints, and all their valuable things. And then the Watchtower will become a bundle of weeds to be burnt. And that's the plan of God. The whole thing is to sift out people who love power more than they love their brother and more than they love God. Which do you love? Is it the first law, which is God? Is it the second law, which is your brother? Or is it Satan's law, which is power? And that is the choice. And a lot of people fall and make the wrong judgment call there, because they get seduced by this power nonsense, which is all to do with money. In the kingdom there is no money, and so you cannot, by being given money, persuade people to be your slave and work for you by money, because they won't need it. So Satan will have nothing to offer you. The reason people do his bidding in this system is because he gives them money, which effectively makes other people into their slaves, because you can pay them to do what you want. In the new system, you can offer people money to do what you want, and they'll say, get lost, I'll do what I want or what God wants. I'm not interested in your money. So you won't be able to induce people to behave badly. So it's all a repetition of Egypt, 2 months late. So they collect in Ramses, which I suppose is Laodicea, and then they do an exodus during cakes, and then they come to Pi-hahiroth, which is us, but they bypass us and shoot off to Etham. And then they do a Ui, which is overturning the watchtower, which happened on Sivan 24, which is Nineveh being overturned, or turned back. And that is 40 days of Jonah after the first watchtower Passover, which is ER 14. Then they come back to Pi-hahiroth. Now, when they do the U-turn and Nineveh gets overturned, they start chasing after the sons of Israel, because the watchtower realizes, oh my God, they've got it right. So they start actually doing the Lord's witness understandings and following them. And when they start chasing after them, they need to be protected by the pillar of cloud, which moves from the van in the front of the Israel to being in their rear. And what that is the fire sign, instead of leading them by being a prophecy, actually occurs and then becomes a protection because, hey, we got a fire sign right. So the fire sign occurs after they do the U-turn on Sivan 24 and before they cross the Red Sea on Tammuz 10, whereas they crossed it on ER 10 when they came out of Egypt, but this is 2 months delayed. And there's 2 fire signs. One is a pillar of cloud seen in the day, and the other is a pillar of fire lighting up at night. And the cloud sign in the day is the Tammuz 7-8 one, and then once that's gone, you follow the pillar of fire, which is the Tammuz 10 one, and once that's gone, you cross the Red Sea. So it's all a greater fulfillment of the Exodus from Egypt, but it's the 3rd fulfillment, so it happens the 3rd month in the year, whereas the 2nd fulfillment on the Catholic Church, leaving that church, 2 dicky birds sitting on the wall, one named Peter, one named Paul, they both left, fly away Peter, fly away Paul, and they went to the second true church. And that's why that nursery rhyme came down, because of the persecution of people who actually told the truth about the Catholic Church. You were killed if you did that overtly, so it got put into a nursery rhyme. I mean, they killed the guy Wycliffe, didn't they, who translated the Bible, and not satisfied with that, 60 years after his death, they exhumed him, burnt his corpse, and put it back in the ground again. Such is the megalomania and wickedness of the Catholic Church, however good looking it appears. Alright, so there's the Exodus, and then they go through the Red Sea on the dry land of the Red Sea with these 2 walls, these 2 churches, these 2 water baptisms. The descended 3EC from Jonah, and this church from me, from Elijah 4. So then we come to this wonderful interpretation of weeping in Tammuz in Ezekiel. So these women are sitting in the north gate. Now, if you look at Ezekiel's temple, the north gate was for the saints. There's 4 gates, I can't remember them. One of them is hell, it's all being thrown out of the church. One's the Abrahamic gate, one's the Isaiah gate, the other's the Jacobean gate. But the north gate is for the Jacobeans, for the saints. And they're sitting in that gate, which means they're judging the saints. And they're weeping, which is a baptism. And it's a weeping in Tammuz. Now, the funeral for the Sumerian false god Tammuz started at the summer solstice, which this year is Tammuz 5, June 21, 10 a.m. And it runs to Tammuz 10. And that's a baptism of people coming in to the temple. And that starts on Tammuz 5 with the baptism of the 2 spies. There's another nice proof of the 2 spies. And it ends on Tammuz 10 with the final baptism of the 1NC reserves. So that's weeping in Tammuz, sitting in judgment in the north gate of the temple. But there's many more reasons for weeping in Tammuz. First of all, you've got 2 fire signs, which are nuclear terrorist attacks. On Britain, Tammuz 7-8, and on the US, Tammuz 10. That'll cause weeping in Tammuz. Then you've got the Passover execution of the congregations in the Watchtower, where 1 person out of each of the 100,000 plus congregations must die. 1 per house is the rule. And so there's 100,000 deaths in the Watchtower. Then you've got World War III breaking out on Tammuz 24, which is the 4th fire sign. So, weeping in Tammuz, yes. You've got Watchtower Passover execution, you've got 2 fire signs, you've got World War III, and you've got this baptism, every possible symbolism. So Tammuz is a great month for God and a diabolically bad month for man who doesn't know God. But perhaps man will get to know God through the events of this month. We shall see. In fact, 50% of them will. Yeah, let's do the World War III thing. So, World War III begins when this beast, the Russian beast of Daniel 7:5, decides to stop being told to get up and eat much flesh, and instead actually gets up and eats much flesh. And the period of him being told to get up and eat much flesh before he actually does that is the sentence count of verse 5 of Daniel 7, which I've got wrong several times. Now we've got a better version of it, which counts as 105 times. It's all about the 3 ribs in the mouth between its teeth, and a bear has 42 teeth. And it's multiplied by 2, I've realised, because it says there's another beast, a second one, which means it's a beast 2 times. So you multiply it by 2. And so you end up with 105 times. And that takes you to Thames 24 from Nisan 9, the international provocation of the bear, when Britain arranged for 23 countries to completely unjustifiably chuck up a bunch of Russian diplomats on the basis of the Skripal deception, which was carried out by a double agent, and so is an illusory illusion, and you cannot deduce anything from what you see actions performed by a double agent, quite obviously. But we condemn the Russians for it, and that's the deep state actually trying to wind them up to get this war going, which the Russians are aware of actually. But the 4th fire sign leaves no choice, and so that gets the Russians involved. And that's when the war starts, 105 days after the provocation. The provocation causes the bear to get up and look around and be provoked and be alert. What's going on here? Why am I being provoked? But it's reticent to do anything because it doesn't want a world war. But the deep state, which has taken over Britain and soon will take over the US, does want a world war. And the deep state is the beast that ascends from the earth, being deep within it, but extends out. And in the US politics it's great at the moment. I mean, you see on public display every day the deep state. And Trump is battling the deep state. And of course they hate Trump. They hate anybody who's an outsider, who's better at doing things than the insiders. And Trump has shown, for all his flaws, that he's better at running an economy and better even at international diplomacy, which nobody would have believed. And so what incompetent, mediocre, destructive people do when they're shown up by somebody who hasn't had the training that they've had but yet is better than them, rather than changing their MO and improving and upping their game to match that of Trump and improving their economic understanding and improving their diplomatic skills, what they do is they condemn Trump and attack him. But they did the same thing. They'll do it. Any outsider who comes in and is better than the insiders generally, unfortunately, it's mankind's terrible characteristic, they will ad hominem attack the outsider. And what it does is it doesn't reflect on the outsider, it shows how terrible the insiders are. But the deep state is presently doing that to Trump. In this country that we've given up, the deep state's already running the place. But there's no dissent at all. If there is, it's covered up, it's terrible. This country doesn't exist, it's such a tragedy. It isn't the country I knew anyway, otherwise we wouldn't be condemning Russia without providing them any evidence at all. So much for British justice. Anyway, back to this. If it starts on Thames 24 and it ends on LL 14, it lasts 50 days. Now that's World War III, and the last 10 days of it are the Great Tribulation, which begins on LL 5, and it runs from LL 5 to LL 14. And you'll have tribulation 10 days, it says in Revelation 2. And that's the length of the Great Tribulation. It's not the only tribulation 10 days. We also get tribulation for 10 days because the protection of the chain, the first 1,000 days of the 42 months, in Revelation 20, that ends on Ab 10, and then we can be attacked for 10 days till Ab 20 when we go into the ark. So that's our tribulation 10 days, but the world gets it for Great Tribulation of 10 days. The last 10 days of the 50 days of World War III, it lasts for 50 days because it is actually an installation for the 4th beast of Daniel 7, which is the image of the beast of Revelation 13, which is the final worldwide globalist government that the dragon has been trying to implement. Satan doesn't want a globalist government, he wants a nationalist. Satan is a nationalist, but his demonic enemies are globalists because they're control freaks. They want a worldwide Nazi government, and they're going to get it, and it will be the worst government ever, and it will make even Satan look good. Satan is going to be a bit like King Jong-un actually. Everyone thinks he's terrible until actually you find out what he wants is, well, he repents basically. but his sons do not. That's World War III. It's the installation for 50 days of this globalist government. That's the purpose of it. It's to scare people into accepting a worldwide fascist Nazi outfit. One global village, one burgomaster for that global village. And that's a power grab by the demons, not by Satan. I should say that we got this present prediction on Sivan 30, the Sabbath, and we published it Thames 2. So we got it before Thames 1, which was the 78th two-witness Asheraian Pentecost, because we have to succeed at the 77th two-witness or three-witness Asheraian Pentecost, not the 78th. And we just managed to succeed before the 78th two-witness Asheraian Pentecost, which is Thames 1, and it's also before the 78th three-witness Asheraian Pentecost, which is Thames 22, 3 weeks later. I should say this. So I was appointed to feed the 2NC proselytes on 1996 Nissan 18 first fruits, 1NC first fruits, after I was thrown out of the Watchtower on 1995 ADAR 11. And 22 and a half years it takes to build a temple, from commissioning to installation. So I was commissioned 96 Nissan 18, and the temple is inaugurated 22 and a half years later, 2018 Tishri 50. And that's the end of us having to work. You see, we're presently in this 1,000-day Lord's Witness Sabbath, which began after 6,000 days with a gap in it, on ADAR 29, which was Nissan 5, 2018. But the problem is that we're still working. And the reason for that is that not only was there a gap when we weren't installed as priests between Sivan 14, 2012 and Tebeth 21, 2012, when we were installed, but there was this period after the Lord's Witness 1NC alienation times when we weren't appointed as 1NC priests or installed, so we had no 1NC priesthood. That ran for 196 days. So we have to pay that back, and that's why I'm still working. And I will be working, obviously, when all these people from the Watchtower turn up. I'm not going to say, well, that's great, now I'm having a Sabbath. We continue to work till we've got the temple inaugurated. So that adds 196 days on top of 2017 ADAR 29, that takes you to 2018 Tishri 15, the inauguration of the temple, 22 and a half years after I was installed. So that's why, although we're in the 1,000-day Lord's Witness Sabbath, there's a technicality which means I have to continue to work until Tishri 15. I don't fully understand that technicality. I don't really understand why, just because I didn't have a 1NC priesthood, but we did have a 2NC priesthood which was alienated, I don't quite understand why that means I have to work both for the 2NCs and the 1NCs in this Sabbath. I don't quite get that, but it's something of that ilk. Alright, so we've done World War III, we've done the Sabbath. Right, finally, another great proof of the Great Tribulation starting L5 is that it says in Luke 12:54-56 that when you see a cloud rising upon wests, then you say there'll be a downpour, and then when you see a south wind blowing, you say there'll be a heat wave. Why can't you understand this sign, says Jesus? And that's telling the reader, why don't you understand this sign? And the reason is because you completely undervalue God's book and don't believe it's written in the code in which it's written. You just think it's a crazily written book, but it's not. It's a brilliantly written, coded book. And south and west is a quarter of a turn, so it's a quarter of a year. It's 3 months. So now this cloud rising in the west is them going into the ark, and ark entrance begins on Sivan 8, and 3 months after that is L8, and that is during the Great Tribulation, which is the heat wave. So there you are. There's the 3 months between the rising cloud. It could be a rising cloud of a fast sign, but it also could be a rising cloud into the ark, because a cloud is water vapour, and liquid water is for humans who are baptised into Isaac with the liquid water. But water vapour is a symbolism for spirit baptism, because it's a different form of cleanliness. It's a more ethereal form, a spirit baptised, a more heavenly form, taking the atmosphere as the heavens. So that spirit baptised people going into the ark, I believe, it could also be people resurrected from the past going into the ark who were spirit baptised. It probably is. These are the people going into the ark who will attend the marriages. It's the family of the bride and the groom going into the ark for the marriages. So ark entrance began on Sivan 8. We don't think it was for humans on this planet. We think it's from people resurrected from the past who are going to be wedding guests, because the dead in Christ shall rise first. That means those who've died in a true church, they rise first into the ark. They're the rising cloud in this sense, actually. Okay, God bless. Thank you very much.